All right, let's do this. Welcome to another deep dive. And today we're going way back to ancient Europe. But not just any history, we're talking military history. We're going to unpack the strategies, the epic battles that shaped the continent, and really try to get inside the minds of the military minds who made it all happen.
You know what's really cool about this deep dive? We're not just talking about these long ago conflicts in a vacuum. We're going to look at the ripple effects.
Yeah, how those battles, those tactics, that military thinking, how that DNA still influences us even today.
Exactly.
So to really appreciate that impact, we got to start at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking Minoans, Mycenaeans, the OG civilizations in Europe. Now, you mentioned the Trojan War in your notes, and, for most folks, it's the stuff of legends. But for someone who's really into military history, what's the significance of this real-life conflict?
The Trojan War, it really gives us a glimpse into the earliest forms of large-scale organized warfare in Europe. We're talking siege warfare, complex alliances, the whole shebang.
It's like the prototype for all the conflicts that followed.
Absolutely.
And speaking of things that shape the future, these civilizations, they gave us Linear B, Europe's oldest deciphered writing system. And okay, I know we only have a limited number of tablets to work with, but man, imagine the military insights, the secrets hidden within those inscriptions.
It's amazing to think about, right? We might have battle plans, logistical records, a window into how they thought strategically.
It's like finding a lost military manual from the dawn of European civilization.
Exactly.
Okay, so we move past the Mycenaeans, and we enter this period called the Greek Dark Ages, a real time of upheaval. Out of that chaos emerges the polis, the Greek city-states.
Yeah.
And among them, two absolute powerhouses, Athens and Sparta. It's almost like this classic brains versus brawn kind of rivalry.
Right.
You got Athens with its democracy and its incredible navy,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have Sparta with its hardcore warrior culture and those legendary hoplites.
It's a fascinating dynamic.
So how did these very different approaches to society actually translate onto the battlefield? How did it shape their military strategies?
Well, think about it. Athens, with its naval power, they were all about maneuverability, controlling the seas, projecting power through their fleet. They formed strategic alliances, really playing the long game.
Makes sense.
Sparta, on the other hand, land-based power, that was their bread and butter. Those heavily armored hoplites, they were all about brute strength and discipline, their formations, their tactics. It was all about dominating on land.
So when the Persian Empire, a massive force, comes knocking, looking to expand, how do these two very different city-states who, let's face it, weren't exactly BFFs, how do they react to this external threat?
Well, it might surprise you, they actually put aside their differences, for a time anyway, and united against this common enemy.
Really?
Yeah. And what happens, we get these epic battles like Marathon and Salamis, battles that showcase the tactical brilliance of the Greeks against a much larger, arguably better equipped force.
I mean, Marathon, it's the ultimate underdog story.
It is.
The Athenians, outnumbered, using the terrain, their strategy, to completely crush the Persians. That must have sent shockwaves through the ancient world.
It did.
And then Salamis,
Oh, man,
a
Slot.
naval battle that really highlights the importance of knowing your enemy, knowing the battlefield.
The Greeks, they knew those narrow straits like the back of their hands.
Yeah,
They basically turned the Persian numbers against them. That larger fleet became a liability.
it's incredible. But these victories weren't just about survival, were they?
No way. They ushered in the golden age of Athens, this explosion of culture, art, philosophy that still resonates today. It laid the foundation for so much of Western civilization.
It's true. But, as we often see in history, power can be intoxicating.
It can.
Athenian power grows, tensions with Sparta resurface, and bam, we get the Peloponnesian War. And I think it was Thucydides, the ancient historian, who really captured this clash of ideologies, this clash of ambitions.
Yeah, the Thucydides trap.
Right, the Thucydides trap.
Yeah.
For those who might not be familiar, can you quickly explain what that is?
Sure. It's this dynamic that emerges when you have a rising power challenging an established one. And that tension, that fear and insecurity on both sides, it can lead to miscalculations, to a war that, in many ways, neither side truly wants.
And in this case, Athens, despite its advantages, ends up falling victim to some internal weaknesses,
Yeah.
to strategic blunders.
Yeah. Their democracy, as revolutionary as it was, could also be a double-edged sword. All those debates, the shifting alliances, it made them less decisive at times, more vulnerable to a more unified, militaristic Sparta.
In Sparta, in victory, They make a classic mistake.
Oh, yeah.
They overextend themselves. They fail to adapt to their new position of power.
Right. Their system, so effective in war, ultimately led to their downfall in peacetime.
And that, my friend, creates a power vacuum.
A big one.
One ripe for the take.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where Alexander the Great enters the picture. This is a name, let's be honest, synonymous with military genius. He inherits the Macedonian throne and pretty much decides, okay, I'm going to conquer most of the known world.
Ambitious guy.
So what sets Alexander apart from all the other military leaders at the time? Why should our listener, who's fascinated by military history, care about this guy's story?
Alexander, he wasn't just about brute force, though he had plenty of that.
Sure.
He adapted, he was brilliant with logistics, managing those supply lines across vast distances, and he inspired his troops to do the seemingly impossible. It was a combination of strategic genius and charisma, a rare combo, allowed him to carve out this empire that stretches from Greece all the way to India.
And in what, like a decade?
Just over a decade. It's insane.
He was a master of using the terrain, a master of psychological warfare, even incorporating elements of conquered armies into his own forces.
Yeah.
He wasn't just conquering, he was building this truly multicultural fighting machine.
He was a visionary, for sure, and his impact, it goes way beyond the battlefield.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not just the military stuff.
No, he helped spread Greek culture, language, ideas. He stimulated trade, laid the foundation for what we call the Hellenistic world.
A huge cultural impact.
Huge. But, and this is a big BUT, as with so many conquerors, his early death at only 33 leaves this massive power vacuum.
Oh man, 33, that's so young.
Oh no, right?
So sad.
And that void, that struggle for control, ultimately gives rise to a new dominant force.
Rome.
Rome, a civilization whose rise is, well, I'd say a mix of triumph and tribulation.
A blueprint for Western military thinking.
Exactly.
That is a story for the next part of our deep dive.
So Rome,
Not
just military might, but political strategy intertwined, creating this force that reshaped the map.
They were masters of weaving those two threads together.
Absolutely. And their rise, it's a story of resilience, adaptation, and I'd argue the blueprint for how the West thinks about military power even today.
You mentioned the Punic Wars in your notes. 3 major conflicts against Carthage over a century of on-again, off-again warfare. What makes those wars so important for someone who's really fascinated by how military strategy evolves?
The Punic Wars, that's where the Roman military really cut its teeth. They were up against a serious adversary in Carthage.
Yeah, they were a maritime superpower.
Exactly. And they had some brilliant generals. Hannibal, for instance.
Oh, man, Hannibal.
Well, the guy who marched an army with elephants over the Alps.
I still can't wrap my head around the logistics of that, the sheer audacity. The Romans must have freaked out seeing war elephants on their doorstep.
Oh, for sure. But what's even more impressive? How the Romans responded to those early setbacks.
What do you mean?
They embodied adapt or die. You know what I mean? So they get hammered at Cannae. Hannibal just outmaneuvers them, completely tactically brilliant.
Right.
But the Romans, they don't just give up. They analyze their failures, they tweak their strategies, and ultimately they turn the tables.
And under Scipio Africanus, they defeat Hannibal at Zama.
Boom. Game over for Carthage. Rome's ascendant.
It's a real testament to their discipline, their organizational skills.
No doubt.
And it wasn't just about winning battles, was it?
No.
They mastered logistics, keeping those supply lines running. They built roads, infrastructure. They knew how to project power effectively. That stuff is crucial and often gets overlooked in military history.
Totally agree. It's not all about the clash on the battlefield. It's the setup, the long game.
And then we have the Marian Reforms, right?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
A turning point that professionalized the Roman army.
Huge changes. Gaius Marius, the guy behind it, his reforms had these ripple effects throughout Roman society, but especially in how they waged war.
For someone who's deep into military history, what were the key elements of those reforms? How did they give Rome a distinct edge?
Okay, so Marius, he opens up military service. It's not just for the landed elite anymore. Wider pool of manpower. Then he standardizes training and equipment. More disciplined, unified force. And the big one, he establishes the cohort system.
Right.
A tactical unit that's super flexible, adaptable. It really proves its worth on those battlefields, conquering all of Europe.
And those reforms, they had consequences that went way beyond the battlefield, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. A professional army, it means more loyalty to the generals, not necessarily to the state.
Oh.
Sets the stage for deeds like Julius Caesar. A fascinating figure, his rise and fall.
Ambition, betrayal, a cautionary tale about the fragility of Republican power.
For sure. Caesar. Brilliant military strategist, logistics, maneuver warfare. He was a master. His campaigns in Gaul, still studied today.
Textbook stuff.
But his success on the battlefield, it goes to his head, fuels those political ambitions. And it ends with his assassination. The Republic's basically on life support at this point.
But even in death, Caesar's legacy, it shapes the future of Rome. His adopted son, Octavian, later known as Augustus,
Augustus.
navigates the chaos, the civil war, becomes the first emperor of Rome.
Shrewd politician, that one.
Yeah.
He consolidates power, brings about the Pax Romana, unprecedented peace and prosperity, right? But he was no slouch on the military front either.
Right.
Used his victories to boost his authority, projecting this image of stability, control.
A good reminder that military power, political savvy, they go hand in hand.
Always.
And even during the Pax Romana, Rome wasn't exactly chilling out, right? There were still those conflicts like the Jewish revolts in Judea.
Right.
What do those uprisings tell us about the challenges of running a vast empire, even one as powerful as Rome?
Those revolts, they weren't just about military clashes. They were fueled by this deep-seated religious and cultural tension. Roman polytheism versus Jewish monotheism.
It's a clash of civilizations in a way.
It is, and it highlights this challenge empires face throughout history. How do you balance unity and diversity?
Right.
When do you allow differences and when do you suppress them? Trying to erase someone's beliefs, that can backfire big time. It breeds instability, rebellion.
So even at the peak of its power, there were these cracks starting to show in the Roman facade. I guess the seeds of decline, they're often sown during the good times.
Oh, yeah, it's when you're at your strongest that you can become complacent. Those cracks in the facade, right? They weren't just cosmetic, they were structural.
Deep, deep down.
And as we look at the decline of the Western Roman Empire, we see those seeds of instability. They weren't just sitting there, they were growing.
Intertwined with external pressures, right? Creating this perfect storm.
Exactly.
So where do we see these cracks widening, those pivotal moments, the ones that really signal the beginning of the end for this once mighty empire?
Well, Emperor Caracalla's Edict of 212, huge turning point. It granted Roman citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire. On the surface, sounds like a unifying gesture.
Increase tax revenue, get more people in the army, right?
Right, but there's always a but. In history, right, it's never that simple.
It's never that simple.
This edict, while well-intentioned, it kind of backfired. Fueled internal competition for resources and power.
I can see that.
It's like adding fuel to a fire that was already smoldering.
And you've got economic instability, corruption within the ruling class, the constant pressure of those barbarian tribes testing the borders. It all boils over in the crisis of the 3rd century. For our listener who loves all things military, how did all this internal strife impact the Roman army, which for centuries was really the backbone of the empire?
It was rough on the army, man. Stretched thin, battling threats from both inside and outside the empire. Loyalty started to fracture. Generals fighting amongst themselves for power, their own ambitions put ahead of the good of Rome. It's a far cry from that disciplined, unified force they had in earlier centuries.
And amidst all this chaos, a new force emerges.
Christianity.
Christianity. Starting as this persecuted sect, offering hope, a sense of community in a world that felt like it was falling apart.
It's interesting, right? The rise of Christianity happening alongside the decline of Rome. It provided this sense of belonging, a shared belief system that transcended the crumbling structures of the empire.
It's almost like the spiritual foundation of the empire was shifting, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, totally. And that shift, it had huge implications. When Christianity becomes the official religion of the empire in 380 CE under Theodosius, well, yeah, it unified people in some ways, but it also led to divisions as other religions were suppressed.
And then Theodosius goes and divines the empire.
Yeah.
Western and Eastern halves, each ruled by one of his sons. Not exactly a recipe for stability in these turbulent times.
It was a formal acknowledgement of this growing separation that was already happening. And the Western Roman Empire, they were already struggling with internal strife and a shaky economy. Now they face even more pressure from those Germanic tribes.
And as if things weren't bad enough, Attila the Hun arrives, leading his warriors west, pushing those Germanic tribes even further into Roman territory.
The Huns, it's like a catalyst. The sack of Rome by the Visigoths in 410.
Oh, man.
I mean, talk about symbolic blows, a real wake-up call for the empire, their vulnerability exposed.
Can you imagine living through those times? The sense of dread as these invaders are crashing against the borders.
It must have been terrifying. And this is a pivotal moment in European history. The Western Roman Empire, burdened by all those internal weaknesses and constant external pressures, they just couldn't withstand the onslaught.
And in 476 CE, it finally happens. The last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, he's deposed by Odoacer, a Germanic general. The Western Roman Empire, at least as we know it, ceases to exist.
It's the end of an era. Centuries of Roman dominance just gone.
It's important to remember, though, it wasn't like someone flipped a switch. The fall of Rome was a gradual decline, a long, slow unraveling of this incredibly complex system.
Right, but that doesn't mean it wasn't momentous.
Absolutely. And even though the empire itself crumbled, its legacy, man, it endured.
Oh, yeah.
Law, language, architecture, military thinking, Rome's fingerprints are all over Europe and the world, really.
It's hard to overstate their influence, their military innovations, the strategies, the discipline, their engineering. We still see echoes of Roman military thinking in modern warfare. It's their legacy, you know?
Incredible. So we've reached the end of our deep dive into ancient European military history. We've seen empires rise and fall, witnessed the brilliance and the blunders of military leaders. It's a story full of strategy, innovation, ambition. What lessons resonate with you most? What insights have you gained from exploring these epic clashes? And how can those insights, those lessons, inform your understanding of history and even maybe our own times? After all, history, it's not just about the past. It's a conversation that continues to shape our present and our future.